Welcome everybody to Unit 2, Unlocking the Power of Evaluation, Methodology, Tools and Dashboards of our online training course. In Unit 1, you already gained insights into the DISCO project and the evaluation topic from a more, let's say, general perspective. Within Unit 2, we will now focus on the evaluation methodology and the tools used in the evaluation of the Living Lab implementations. We want to start with this session, which is called Evaluation Methodology Explained, Frameworks for Success. In addition, Unit 2 will also provide you with another session on the DISCO dashboard and other tools that are used within the extended context of the project. To start with, I would like to draw your attention to important questions that we will be addressing in this session. We will deal in particular with the following questions. What are the evaluation goals and how does the scoping of the DISCO evaluation look like? What are the elements of the evaluation and how do they interact? And finally, how are the effects of implemented measures determined? So let's take a closer look at the first question. The evaluation centers on the question, what impact have the implemented measures generated in the Living Labs? The KPIs developed as part of the project are used in particular to answer this question. In addition, the contribution of the Living Lab solutions to the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, will also be analyzed. The third building block is to check whether the measures implemented by the Living Labs are compliant with the city's Sustainable Urban Logistic Plans, short SULPs. In order to address the objectives described here, the evaluation methodology presented focuses on the first three phases of the evaluation lifecycle. You already know this lifecycle-oriented approach from Unit 1. You also already know the importance of defining the content to be addressed in an evaluation accordingly. If we take a look at the context of the DISCO project, we also have the classic structure based on work packages and tasks, which are assigned to the work packages. The DISCO project consists of 7 work packages, and the evaluation of the measures introduced in the Living Labs are located in the work packages 4 and 5. Specifically, the tasks defined for this are task 4.6, the evaluation of impacts at Staring Living Labs, and task 5.4, final cross-site evaluation. Now that you know the overall objectives of the evaluation task within the project, let's look at the specific elements of the evaluation framework and how they interact. As I already mentioned, we address the first 3 phases of the evaluation cycle. While the activities in phase 1 and phase 2 should take place before the implementation of measures, the activities in phase 3 address the work that should take place during or after implementation. Within phase 1, which is define evaluation setup and goals, the goals to be addressed are at the center of consideration. And in principle, these can originate from a global or a more local perspective. In phase 2, on the other hand, the measures to be implemented are our main focus. In this phase, the measures must be described, categorized, and linked to the elements to the subsequent evaluation. After this has been done, the evaluation takes place in phase 3 by collecting and analyzing data as well as information. As I already mentioned, this step focuses on 3 evaluation modules that are in line with the objectives of the DISCO evaluation. I would now like to take you through all these 3 phases to illustrate which questions should be addressed in order to get from the definition of objectives in phase 1 to the determination of the impact of the measures implemented, which is phase 3. In phase 1, we need to take a closer look at the Sustainable Development Goals and work out how they relate to the planned measures. In addition, we need to check whether there is already an existing Sustainable Urban Logistic Plan, or if such a plan can be developed in the context of the DISCO project. Building on this, it's very important to think about the right categories for describing different measures. This is needed later, for example, to be able to analyze and assign the effects of the measures accordingly. And it is very important to define the right indicators in connection with this, on the basis of which the effects can be determined. In order to communicate this preliminary work to all stakeholders involved, it is advisable to summarize the most important facts in a central document, such as a fact sheet, for example. Now let's move to phase 2. To categorize the DISCO-X measures, 5 impact domains were defined as part of the project. You already know these from Unit 1. These will now be used in phase 2 as an important structure element. In addition, the DISCO-X measures are categorized according to their characteristics. For example, if it is a physical measure, such as a proof of concept implementation, or if it's a digital measure, such as a simulation using, for example, a digital twin, or if a measure is mainly focusing on business activities, for example, building partnerships or new business models. As part of the definition of measures, it is then important to establish the connection between the measures and KPIs. Selected KPIs are usually used here, as a measure generally never addresses all of our 25 defined KPIs. Now that you have an overview of phase 1 and 2, let's move to phase 3. Here we will look at how to determine the effects of the implemented measures. We will start by determining the effects with the help of the KPIs, the so-called KPI-based impact analysis. This module is made up of 3 elements which are linked together. These are, first, a clustering and ranking of KPI regarding their importance. Second, a quantitative or qualitative assessment of value changes that takes into consideration before and after implementation data. And third, an integrated approach that combines the previous 2 elements into one evaluation indicator, and this indicator is called the KPI value. Starting with the first element, the clustering and ranking of KPIs. This task is carried out by the representatives of the Living Labs themselves. The background to this is to find out which KPIs are particularly important from their point of view in order to bring about a positive change. In a first step, a clustering of all 25 KPIs according to their importance for a positive city development is conducted. The first cluster, cluster A, includes all KPIs that are very important from the perspective of the Living Labs. Cluster B includes all that are important. Cluster C, the less important ones, and cluster D includes KPIs that are not applicable from the Living Lab perspective. This is followed by a rating of the KPIs with the 4 cluster regarding their within the 4 clusters regarding their specific rank. And as I said, we will use this information later to derive a combined measure per KPI. After clustering and ranking the KPIs, we now come to the quantitative analysis. This task focuses on the KPIs before and after the Living Lab implementation period. The change in data points per KPI between the first and the second survey is compared and displayed as a percentage increase or percentage decrease by dividing the KPI values of the second survey by the KPI value of the first survey and adding -1 to the result. This evaluation based on real-time, or not real-time, but real data, this evaluation based on real data enables an exact measurement of progress in the form of a valid percentage value. This can be used, for example, for expert discussions on how to further reduce or improve a value. Let's make an example here. KPI 8, CO2 emissions per kilometer, changes, for example, from 0.3 to 0.2. With the use of our formula, this equals a positive change by -33%, while a change, for example, from 0.3 to 0.27 will only result in an improvement of 10%. We use this formula to determine the changes in value of KPIs 1 to 20. For KPIs 21 till 25, that will start at 0, or most of them will start at 0. We will instead use intervals based on actual values rather than a percentage. So based on the quantitative data described above, the next step now is to normalize the change in value. This is done by weighting the results achieved. We use a scale from -3, which means significant worsening, to +3, significant improvements, and we call it a weighted achievement. This assessment allows the KPI change to be compared across the Living Labs without showing the exact value of the change. The intervals to apply for the conversion of the percentage values have been set preliminary and will be validated after the ex-post measurements are completed. For KPIs where measurements are lacking, a qualitative judgment can be made. From a more system-oriented perspective, the final step is to combine the findings of the work carried out previously. For this purpose, the cluster categorization is multiplied by the derived weighting for each KPI. The result is the so-called KPI value as an integrated key figure that combines the perspective of the living labs based on the clustering approach, the data-driven perspective, the quantitative or qualitative analysis, as well as the evaluation perspective with the KPI weighting. In relation to a KPI, a value of the cluster element can be between 0, which means not applicable, and 3, very important. The weighting value for a KPI can be between -3 and +3. In the best case, as you can see, a KPI value of 9 can be derived, and in the worst case, a KPI value of -9 can be determined from this approach. Now let's move on to the second module of phase 3, the contribution of the DISCO-X measures to the Sustainable Development Goals. To do this, we first need to take a closer look at the SDG structure. As you know, there are 17 SDGs in total. The measures of the DISCO project address 7. To find this out, the SDGs were analyzed in more detail at the target level. The target level can be understood as the second level of the SDG framework and is made up of concretely formulated goals. We have identified the following targets that are directly related to the Living Lab measures. For example, target 3.9, by 2030, reduce number of deaths and illness from hazardous chemicals in air, water and soil pollution and contamination. This is well connected to all measures that help to reduce traffic emissions. However, a general identification of SDGs targets that are supported in the project is not sufficient for our approach. As you know, and as you can see here, 25 KPIs were defined as part of the project. The question of which KPIs are related to which SDG targets is therefore important in order to be able to carry out a more precise evaluation. Therefore, all KPIs were checked for their contribution to the SDG targets. As a result, you can get the following assignment. As an example, SDG target 13.2, integrate climate change measures into national policies, strategies and planning, is linked with KPI 25, the SALP, number of locally politically approved SALP or freight logistic plan. But that's not all. As already explained, we have also created a link between the KPIs and the impact domains defined in the project. And we have also analyzed DISCO-X with regard to sustainable, and we also have analyzed the DISCO-X with regard to suitable KPIs. This approach now makes it possible to establish the link between the SDGs at target level, the KPIs, and the DISCO-X measures implemented. As an example from DISCO-X, the DISCO curve tool can be traced to the relevant SDG targets. We take example SDG 3.9 again, traces to the KPI failed deliveries at first attempt. But there is a one-to-many relationship between SDGs and KPIs, meaning that SDGs can trace to more than one KPI. The goal 9.1, for example, develop quality, reliable, sustainable and resilient infrastructure, including regional and transporter infrastructure to support economic development and human well-being with a focus on affordable and equitable access for all, traces to 3 of our KPIs. Space utilization efficiency of parking spaces, size of transport infrastructure made available, and the warehouse space made available. Now let's move on to the third and final module of phase 3, which is the PI compliance to SALP. As you already know, a SALP, Sustainable Urban Logistic Plan, can be seen as a strategic framework to shape sustainable urban logistics. To support this, SALP goals shall be addressed by means of DISCO-X. As part of this evaluation module, we have provided 2 basic alternatives in order to deal with this task. The first alternative is there already exists a SALP in the respective city or is currently under development. Alternative 2, there is not yet a plan or associated activities that enables the utilization of targets. In the first case, the existing objectives from the SALP can be used and the measures of a living lab can be compared with regard to their compliance. In the second case, a compliance check can be carried out with the help of already formulated guidelines, and I will show you how this works. For this purpose, we utilize the SALP guidelines from ELTIS, which is the European Local Transport Information Service. And this is a non-profit European portal for transport measures, policies, and practices implemented in cities and regions in Europe. The guidelines address important goals and aspects within, for example, socio-economic, commercial, operational, and technical dimensions. With the help of this structure, the DISCO-X can now be checked for compliance with the formulated guidelines. Within the DISCO framework, we have used the following scale. 3 equals high compliance, no need for adaptation. 2, medium compliance, and short time for adaptation. And the rating of 1, low compliance, long time adaptation. While in the example shown, the DISCO curve has a large compliance with the goal of increasing livability of urban environment, DISCO proxy, on the other hand, has a stronger compliance with optimizing logistics operations. These findings can now be used to optimize measures with regard to higher compliance or to introduce further measures. Very well. Now I have guided you through the evaluation framework. To conclude this session, I would like to summarize the most important points. First, the evaluation focuses on the introduction of DISCO-X measures in the living labs. Second, the impact of the measures is determined on the basis of the KPIs developed. Third, in doing this, the KPI-based impact analysis takes different perspectives and combines them into a coherent framework. Fourth, in addition, the contribution of the measures with regard to the SDGs is assessed, and compliance with the SALP goals and guidelines is determined. And last but not least, this approach is transferable and can therefore also be used for the evaluation of the twinning living labs. Thank you very much, and I wish you once again good luck for the quiz and a lot of good discussions within our forum.